Her small hand reached out, steady and unshaken, and with one firm push, she closed the heavy safe door, shutting away stacks of cash and glittering diamonds without even a second glance. David Miller's heart stopped. For a man who had seen billionaires crumble under less temptation, the sight of a 16-year-old girl walking away, as if none of it mattered, was almost impossible to believe. Who was this girl, and how could she resist what the entire world worshipped? That single moment would haunt him through sleepless nights and change both of their lives forever. David Miller sat alone in his penthouse office overlooking downtown Boston, the city glowing with afternoon sunlight. From the outside, he looked like the picture of calm, his suit pressed, his posture flawless, his eyes closed, as though he had drifted into a midday nap. But behind those closed eyelids, his mind was racing. He was not sleeping at all. He was waiting. The room carried the faint scent of aged leather and polished mahogany, a shrine to his success. His shelves were lined with books he rarely touched. His desk was immaculate, and near the window stood a tall cabinet with a small but deliberate detail. Its safe door was wide open. Inside gleamed neat stacks of $100 bills and a velvet pouch that spilled diamonds under the slanted rays of sunlight. He had left it that way on purpose, a bait in a trap he had set not for an enemy, not for a rival, but for a child. This was not an act of cruelty, but of curiosity, or so he told himself. For weeks, David had been watching the daughter of his housekeeper, Anna Carter. The girl's name was Lila, no more than 16, slim and wide-eyed with the kind of hopeful face you only saw in kids who grew up with little but dreamed of more. She came after school sometimes, carrying her books while her mother worked late, cleaning the penthouse. David had noticed her quiet presence, noticed how she sometimes paused at the threshold of his office, her eyes roaming across his towering shelves and polished floor as though she'd stepped into another world. But there was something else he had noticed. Her gaze always lingered just a moment longer whenever the safe caught her eye. He wondered, was it innocence or temptation? David Miller was a man who believed everything had a price. He had built an empire on contracts, numbers, risks, and rewards. People had betrayed him for less than what sat inside that safe. Trust in his world was an illusion until it was tested. Tonight, he intended to test hers. He leaned back in his chair, his eyes closed, every sense tuned to the silence of the penthouse. The hum of the city below, the faint ticking of a clock on the wall, the rhythm of his own breath. Then soft footsteps, light, hesitant, moving closer down the marble hallway. His heartbeat slowed. She was coming. The office door creaked. He heard it before he saw it, the subtle protest of hinges as someone eased the door open. Through slitted lashes, he caught a glimpse of Lila Carter, her hair pulled back in a loose ponytail, the straps of her worn backpack slipping off her shoulders. She held a book so tattered the spine looked ready to give. Her fingers curled protectively around it. For a moment, she stood frozen in the doorway, staring. The sunlight framed her face, and David noticed the hesitation flicker in her eyes. They shifted from the shelves of books to the broad desk and finally, inevitably, to the gaping safe. David felt tension coil in his chest. This was the moment. Would her curiosity bend into desire? Would the lure of diamonds and cash crush the innocence he thought he saw in her? Lila took a step inside, then another. The floor seemed to echo louder under her careful steps. She wasn't looking at him. He was still slouched with his eyes closed, pretending to be lost in sleep. No, her attention was fixed on the gleam of wealth that lay exposed. His fingers curled against the armrest. The game was cruel, he knew that. But wasn't it better to see the truth now rather than wonder forever? Lila stopped in front of the safe. The light caught her eyes, turning them bright with reflection. David's heart thumped. He had seen grown men, seasoned businessmen, unable to resist less than this. Surely a girl from a small apartment in the rough part of town couldn't walk away. But then something unexpected happened. Her brows pinched together, not in greed but in worry. She set her book down on the desk carefully, as if placing something precious, then stepped closer to the safe. Her small hand reached out, not trembling but steady. She pressed the door closed. With a firm, decisive push, the heavy metal door latched shut with a final click. David nearly opened his eyes in shock. She didn't linger. She didn't peek over her shoulder to see if he was watching. She simply picked her book back up, tucked it under her arm, and left the room with the same quiet grace she had entered. Not a glance back, not a flicker of temptation. As though the piles of money and jewels had been nothing but furniture in the room, irrelevant compared to the pages she held in her hands. The door closed softly behind her, and David finally let his eyes open. The safe stood closed, its secrets untouched. Something stirred in him, something he had not felt in years. Respect, wonder, a sudden tenderness he could not explain. He had expected betrayal, or at least a flicker of longing. Instead, he had witnessed something purer. She had chosen honesty without knowing she was being tested. She had chosen integrity when no one was looking. David leaned forward, pressing his palms against his knees, his chest tight with an emotion he almost didn't recognize. It had been so long since he'd felt it that he hardly knew what to call it. But deep down, he knew it was admiration. That night, he couldn't sleep. His thoughts kept circling back to Lila Carter, a girl with nothing but her books, her quiet strength, and a heart that seemed untouchable by greed. He had measured his entire world in terms of profit and loss, but her actions had shifted something inside him. For the first time in years, he began to wonder if there was something money truly couldn't buy. By the time the sun rose over Boston the next morning, David Miller knew one thing with certainty. Lila Carter deserved more than the shadows of wealth she lived beneath. She deserved an opportunity, a chance to chase her dreams, a chance at an education that could change her life. And maybe, just maybe, in giving her that chance, his own life would change too. The test was over. The results were undeniable. But what came next? That was the real story waiting to unfold. The second test. The next evening, David Miller found himself restless, pacing the length of his penthouse office. The city lights blinked beneath him, a sea of movement and noise. But he couldn't shake the stillness that Lila Carter had left behind in his soul. He had expected that little experiment to confirm what he already believed about people, that greed always wins. But she had proved him wrong, and now he couldn't let it go. For a man like David, doubt was intolerable. He had built his fortune on control, on knowing every angle, predicting every move. But Lila's choice to close the safe without hesitation gnawed at him. Was it instinct? Was it truly her nature? Or had she simply been afraid of being caught? He wanted to believe in her purity, but a part of him whispered that maybe, just maybe, he had witnessed a fluke. So he set another test. This time he told himself it would be more dangerous, more tempting. He instructed Anna, Lila's mother, to bring her daughter along again the following day, claiming he needed extra help sorting through some old boxes of documents. Anna, grateful for the extra pay, agreed without question. Lila arrived quietly, dressed in the same worn sweater, her eyes carrying that same quiet determination. David watched her from the corner of his vision as she stacked files and dusted shelves. She worked with a discipline unusual for her age, as if she were carrying a weight heavier than her years. He noticed how she handled everything with care, as though even the dustiest box was worth respect. Hours passed, then David slipped away, leaving the door to his office slightly ajar. Inside, on his desk, he had placed an envelope stuffed with crisp bills, $10,000 in cash. No safe, no lock, just paper temptation, lying there in plain sight. He stepped into the hallway, silent, watching from a shadowed corner. Moments later, Lila entered to put away another stack of books. She spotted the envelope almost immediately, her steps slowed. The pause was longer this time. Her hand trembled slightly as she brushed a strand of hair from her face. David's breath caught. This was the moment of truth. Lila reached for the envelope. David's chest tightened. She picked it up, weighed it in her hands. The air between them, though he was hidden, felt charged. He had never felt such tension in his life. Not in a boardroom, not in a billion-dollar negotiation, not even when markets threatened to collapse his empire. Then, slowly, she slid the envelope under the stack of documents on his desk, tucking it safely out of sight. She looked around the room, almost embarrassed that such wealth had been left carelessly exposed, and whispered under her breath, "People forget too easily what money can do to them." David's heart lurched. Her words pierced through the thick walls of cynicism he had built around himself. She wasn't afraid of being caught. She understood. She knew. But the night wasn't finished testing either of them. As Lila left the office, the elevator in the hallway dinged open. Two men stepped out, contractors David had hired earlier to repair some wiring. He had forgotten they were scheduled. Rough-looking, careless in their work boots, they spotted Lila instantly. She clutched her book closer, clearly intimidated. "What's a kid like you doing up here in a place like this?" one of them sneered. "Lose your way to the library?" Lila's voice was quiet but steady. "I'm here helping my mum. She works here." The other man laughed. "Helping your mum, huh? In a place like this, you could just help yourself." His eyes darted to the office, then back to her. "Bet there's more money in there than you'll ever see in your life." David stiffened in the shadows, anger surging through him. He hadn't planned this, but now he had to see how Lila would react. Her grip on the book tightened. She drew in a breath and said firmly, "That money doesn't belong to me, and I don't need it to know who I am." The men exchanged a look, chuckling, but her answer silenced them quicker than any threat could have. She walked past them, head held high, never breaking stride. David felt his chest swell with something he could hardly name: shame for having doubted her, pride for her courage, and something deeper still, a longing to protect that kind of purity in a world that would try to crush it. When the workers left, David returned to his office, staring at the envelope tucked neatly beneath the papers. For a long time, he stood in silence, replaying her words in his mind. "I don't need it to know who I am." For a man who had spent decades defining himself by numbers and possessions, the realization hit like a storm. He had tested her twice, and both times she had chosen integrity over temptation. And now he wondered if the true test wasn't for her at all. It was for him. Because the real question was, would he continue to live as though money defined everything? Or would he allow himself to believe in something greater? That night, he couldn't sleep once again. This time, however, it wasn't uncertainty that haunted him. It was the clarity of what had to be done. He knew Lila Carter's life could not remain in the shadows. She deserved more. She had proven her worth in ways that no amount of wealth could measure. And for the first time in years, David Miller felt a new kind of fear. The fear of failing her, of letting this rare light slip away before it could truly shine. What he didn't know yet was that his decision to help Lila would not only transform her life forever, but would also draw him into a path filled with risks he had never imagined. Because sometimes giving someone a chance is the most dangerous gamble of all. The ultimate investment days turned into weeks. Yet David Miller couldn't shake the memory of Lila Carter's words. Every time he sat behind his massive desk, surrounded by the glitter of wealth, her steady voice echoed in his mind. "I don't need it to know who I am." Those words had become like a compass, pointing him toward a truth he had ignored for too long. He began inviting Anna and Lila more often under different excuses. At first, Anna thought it was just more work and more pay, something she was grateful for. But David's true intention wasn't about chores or paperwork. It was about giving Lila access to something bigger. He started leaving books for her. Thick volumes on history, literature, and science slipped quietly onto his shelves where he knew she would find them. And she always did. Her eyes would light up as she picked them out, clutching them the way some people clutch treasure. One afternoon, David asked her a simple question as she lingered over a book of poetry. "What do you dream of, Lila?" She froze, caught off guard. For a moment, she looked down as though embarrassed to admit her hopes in front of a man like him. Finally, she whispered, "I want to study. I want to learn enough to make a difference. Maybe become a teacher one day. But dreams like that cost more than my mom and I could ever afford." David felt something shift deep in his chest. He had heard 1,000 dreams spoken by businessmen, investors, and politicians, most of them driven by greed or vanity. But this was different. This was pure. That night, he made his decision. He would change her life. The next morning, he called Anna into his office. She stood nervously by the door, wringing her hands, worried she might have done something wrong. David gestured for her to sit. "Anna," he said firmly but gently, "your daughter has a gift. She's bright, she's strong, and she deserves more than this life of cleaning up after men like me." Anna's eyes filled with tears, but she shook her head. "Mr. Miller, please, don't say such things. We're grateful for the work. That's enough." "No," David interrupted, softly leaning forward, "it isn't enough. I've built a life where I measure everything by money, but your daughter showed me something that money can't buy. She closed that safe without hesitation, twice. She reminded me that honesty and character still exist, and I would be a fool to ignore that." Anna covered her mouth with her hand, her shoulders trembling. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I want to sponsor her education," David replied. "Not just pay for school, but give her the chance to attend the best. Whatever she dreams, I'll help make it possible." For the first time in years, David saw raw, unguarded gratitude on someone's face. Anna wept openly, thanking him over and over. But David wasn't done yet. Later that evening, he asked Lila herself. She listened, wide-eyed disbelief written all over her face. "Why would you do this for me?" she asked softly. David looked at her for a long moment before answering. "Because you reminded me of something I'd forgotten. You reminded me of what it means to be human. And because sometimes the greatest investments aren't in stocks or buildings, they're in people." Lila's eyes shimmered with tears, but her smile was brighter than any jewel in his safe. From that day forward, David made good on his promise. He enrolled her in a private school, arranged tutors, and gave her access to resources she had never imagined. At first, she struggled. She felt out of place among wealthier kids, felt the sting of judgment in their whispers. But every time she thought of giving up, she remembered his words, and more importantly, she remembered her own. "I don't need money to know who I am." Years passed. Lila flourished. She graduated with honors, then pursued her dream of teaching. David attended her graduation, standing quietly at the back, a man who had once doubted everything but now believed in something greater. When Lila spotted him in the crowd, she ran to him, hugging him tightly. "You didn't just change my life," she whispered. "You gave me the chance to change others." David smiled for the first time, feeling that his fortune had finally bought something worth keeping. Not possessions, not power, but genuine purpose. In helping her, he had healed something broken inside himself. And as he walked away from that ceremony, watching Lila surrounded by friends and possibilities, David knew his experiment had given him the greatest result of all. A reminder that wealth is empty, without love, trust, and humanity. He had set out to test a girl, but in the end it was his own soul that had been tested and saved.